This is Professor Crosby, once again broadcasting live, actually not so much live from Alaska. We have wrapped up Unit 1 material and we're moving into Unit 3. It's still kind of unique because we've already covered some of Unit 3, so we've already kind of set up the precursor to the presidency, and then we looked at the Electoral College and really kind of analyzed how the president is selected today, how he was supposed to be selected, and how the president is selected today. Again, I use he just because we've only ever had male presidents. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but it has been the case so far. We have a presidential election coming up in 2024, and like I said in class, I don't see much changing right now. The Republicans are still kind of vying for their champion, and we'll see whether or not Donald Trump can consolidate the base behind his kind of platform, or if the Republican Party is going to tear themselves apart. I think Joe Biden's best chance is the latter option there. This is material we've already covered, kind of looking at the elements of what the presidency was supposed to be and why the Founding Fathers really wanted to set the presidency apart, that they argued the presidency has to be the best of us, has to be the clear, undisputed leader that could be followed by all Americans. And this idea of leadership, not just a leader of a party, but a true leader of a nation, is an idea that I think we've kind of lost. And I don't know if we're going to see much of resolve in the presidency until we get that idea, rekindle that idea of a true leader and what a leader is, rather than just some partisan leader or a partisan kind of chief. Nonetheless, the presidency is quite difficult, and this is stuff we've already gone over, so I just want to kind of show you where we are and how it fits in this whole thing. So as we kind of look through the Article 2, I did send out a PDF of Words We Live By. As you read through that, focus on the text of it. Some of the extras and the boxes and the pullouts and whatnot, some of those aren't overly interesting or meaningful, but the text, the core of it's really, really good on taking us through Article 2 and looking at what the presidency is supposed to be. Again, I'm going to hit the highlights just really quick. So these are things we've kind of gone over, but it's worth noting. The first thing is that the presidency originally had no term limits. There was a presidency, they thought George Washington would be president for life. They offered it to him. In essence, they believed that a president, just like any other leader, could be elected and remain elected as long as his leadership was sound. And this was the case. Washington was offered this. They said that we need a re-election process to guarantee that the leader in power is a quality leader, and so we had like a reaffirmation. And so every fourth year was supposed to be more of a reaffirmation of a quality leader. It wasn't supposed to be the turnover we really are seeing today. However, political parties kind of took over the presidency following Washington, and it became really kind of an extension of partisan infighting in the United States. And so presidents kind of offered their not condolences, but their respect to Washington by never really challenging this precedent, all the way up until FDR. FDR is going to be the first president that actually is going to try to go for a third term, a third full term. And not only does he win a third term, he wins a fourth term as well. And so FDR is going to prompt the 22nd Amendment. And it's easy to remember because the 22nd Amendment, just remember it as 2 terms. The 22nd Amendment is going to be ratified right here in the wake of FDR's passing, as the nation really asked whether or not it's good policy to have a president like FDR dominate the office for so long, because FDR was able to use the circumstances of the time, albeit the Great Depression or World War II, to really solidify a lot of backing from the people. And so there's a lot of question marks in FDR's reign and the tactics he used, but he did show us very effectively how those tactics could be used for a reaffirmation. And so very quickly, the two political parties argued that that's not something they want to do and limit it to 2 terms, giving us kind of the setup of the modern presidency, where after 2 terms or 10 years, the presidency goes down. Now, some students get confused after that 2 terms or 10 years, because if I have 2 terms at 4 years apiece, that should mean I have 8 years. However, the question is, what happens if a presidency takes over for a term that was not theirs, that they were not elected in? The way the Founding Fathers parsed that out, they said, well, if you have more than half of that term, right, then you cannot run for re-election. If you're not more than half of that term, then you can. So if you serve for 3 years of an election that you weren't elected in, so the elected individual died, and you serve 3 years of that term, you could only be reelected once because you would be disqualified from being reelected in the second year, given the 10th year. Right? So you could only serve up to 1 elected, 2 elected, and then up to 2 years of an election you did not win. So that first 2 years has to come sometime before. And so that's how the 8 years or 10 years or 2 terms kind of plays out. The most important process was the election, which is why we had the Electoral College, and this is all stuff we've already gone over in class. So I'm going to speed through all of this as we kind of getting through this idea of the Article 2 not really setting up a lot of powers given directly to the presidency. It just doesn't. The politics of it, we assume that if you put the right person in the office would take care of itself. And this is why we had the office the way it was. It was selected by Electoral College. It was affirmed kind of by the people's vote in the House of Representatives. Remember, we didn't believe the Electoral College would select the president. We thought it would be given back to the House of Representatives at the end to be selected. And then we gave the impeachment process to guarantee that any person who violated the office or disgraced the office would, for any reason really, or lost the general trust of the people, would be removed. And so we built a position that, for all intents and purposes, required the highest affirmation of being in order to hold the position. And that was really the case until partisan politics took over. And partisan politics today is essentially has looked at presidents that said, yeah, they lied under oath, but, it's not so bad. He's still our president. We did this with Trump. We did this with Clinton. To an extent, you could argue Nixon kind of falls in this one where at the end of the day, if you're one of the political parties, you can't turn on your president without major political consequences. And so what the presidency was supposed to be in its original iteration, it really has not lived up to that. The vice president's a little bit different of a ball of wax because the vice president is actually not given an executive role. The vice president is one of these checks and balances. Remember, we talked about having 3 branches of government where we have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary. And one of the things that I think is unnoticed, even by scholars in the field, is when we start talking about checks and balances, one of the checks that the executive branch was given on the legislature, because remember, the Founding Fathers believed that the legislative branch would be the most powerful. So on one hand, they do give the presidency that veto, right? So POTUS gets the veto, which protects the presidency or the office of the executive from this kind of like unhinged attack of a unified legislature. But I don't think we realize how much this kind of came into the consideration as well. If the vice president is president of the Senate, then that puts an executive check within the Senate. And so another kind of check, another protective element of the executive branch against the tyranny of the lawmakers is having the vice president sit as president of the Senate. Now, the vice president cannot really kind of act like any normal member of the Senate and only can vote if it's a tie. But in essence, this kind of accomplishes this kind of check and balances political philosophy role. And it's important to note that of all the things in the Constitution, the vice presidency is not empowered with really any executive responsibility outside of legislature. And so in so many ways, the vice presidency is a legislative office. And then we kind of unpack this in class on what happened here And we already went over this quite extensively, but it's worth kind of going over. Remember, in the wake of Washington, Washington left such a hole, such a power vacuum in our nation that the politics following Washington kind of led to a lot of shenanigans with, John Adams serving with Thomas Jefferson as his vice president. This created a lot of problems for Adams. In fact, Adams is going to be disgraced for the next 200 years because Jefferson spends most of his time just disgracing Adams. And so this kind of like frustration within the parties is going to force the parties to kind of develop a different system. And this is really going to manifest in the election of 1800, one of the most contentious and difficult elections in our history. But what it does is it also shows that even when a party is aligned, it doesn't always work out the way you planned. So in that case, Aaron Burr got 73 electoral votes. Jefferson got 73. And Aaron Burr still, he was a representative of the North. He came from New York. And at the end of the day, Jefferson and Burr kind of fought it out politically to decide who was going to be the presidency. And so it became very, very clear that the presidency was going to be politicized quickly. And instead of actually correcting that, instead of actually mitigating the politicization of the presidency, we just kind of condoned it. We actually passed the 12th Amendment that effectively allows a single political party to simultaneously hold control over the election of the presidency and the vice presidency at the same time. So today, the vice presidency is not elected independent of the president, but rather is selected by whatever the party winner is for the primaries we discussed. Whoever wins that primary gets to select their own vice president. And usually that vice president is selected for whatever appeal they bring to the ticket. You see the strength of the ticket being a primary consideration there. And so we see that kind of element playing out. And once again, these are stuff that are brought up in the book. I'm not going to go over them. Election day, we have the election day in November, but remember, people don't actually elect the president. We cast a general election vote, but that vote really goes to determine the electoral vote. And so the electors don't actually cast their vote until the second Wednesday in December. So even though we often know who the president's going to be based on the November election, we actually don't have an official presidency until the electors cast their vote. Qualifications in succession, not many. The Constitution says no person except a natural-born citizen or citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible for the office of president. And what that means is we don't know. Natural-born has not really been parsed out by the Supreme Court, and there's a lot of judicial opinions on it. One of the judicial opinions argues that it has to be born in the United States. Another judicial opinion says no. However, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on this, and absent a Supreme Court ruling, we may not really know what we mean by natural born. Historically, in the English tradition, however, natural born could mean two different things. On one, it's called jus sanguinis, and the other one, jus soli. Jus sanguinis means citizen by blood, means if one of your president is a blood citizen of a nation, then that citizenship passes through blood to you. You are offered that citizenship based on your bloodline. The other argument is jus soli, which is citizen by soil. If you're born there, you're allowed citizenship or you're offered citizenship. This is why many people could have joint citizenship joint citizen or double citizenship. You could actually literally be like an American citizen born in Canada, and you could actually have dual citizenship in that case. Now, when are you allowed dual citizenship and when do you have to pick one? That all depends on the relationships between the two countries that are in competition. So generally speaking, if your blood and your soil are in agreement, you're generally allowed dual citizenship. If there's a warring faction or some type of international calamity between where you were born or where your parents were born, then those nations may require that you renounce one citizenship in favor of the other one, right? So at the end of the day, we really don't have high qualifications. Natural born, 35 years of age, and 14 years a resident of the United States. However, that's where a lot of pundits come in and say, yeah, but it's all the other qualifications. It's all the things that would likely get you elected. And so we really poll this quite extensively on looking at all the reasons why people vote, all the things we look at. And oddly enough, what the president actually does ends up being relatively low on the why do you vote for a president kind of thing. So the qualifications is still an issue in my mind. I really do think we need to increase qualifications to something far more viable for commander-in-chief of the military and chief CEO of the largest bureaucratic organization on the planet. However, those people disagree, because if we keep the qualifications small or low, then it really continues to benefit the political parties, because they can continue to typecast political candidates that they can simply kind of figure out who's going to do well. And the entry requirements remaining low is really a boon to the two political parties to basically cast their candidates. And we see that. And this is why we have elections like this one right here. I mean, in 1960, we have a guy on the left by the name of John F. Kennedy, which was calm, cool, collected, really did well on television, knew how to work a crowd, was loved by the nation. And then we had a guy on the right here that was pugnacious. He was straightforward. He didn't look great on camera. He sweat a lot on TV. When he was asked a question, he gave a very technical, legalistic kind of answer. He wasn't great at the politics. And in 1960, this guy right here is far more qualified to be president of the United States than this guy ever thought about being. Nixon, by that time, had been vice president. He has foreign policy chops. He really knew far more about the job and what the job would entail than John F. Kennedy did. But the problem is, because of this ability of political parties to kind of typecast candidates, John F. Kennedy is going to win this election in a shrewd political move where he allies with a Southern gentleman from the state of Texas by the name of Lyndon Baines Johnson. And so the politics of the 1960 election really kind of win the day. And we really continue to see this kind of presidency kind of move down the ladder. So instead of picking qualified candidates, we pick candidates that can get affirmation, get the love. They can rev up the crowd, so to speak. And this is something that people are like, well, Donald Trump doesn't really rev up the crowd, but he does. He revs up a large voting group that arguably has not gone away. Joe Biden is not an exciting candidate, but frankly, following Obama, the Democrats were kind of hard pressed to find somebody to step in those shoes. And so I think the Democrats are still fighting kind of an expectations game because Obama fit that candidate so well. He was charismatic. He knew how to work a crowd. He knew how to run a campaign. He knew how to kind of inspire people, if you will, which is, what you need to do. Now, it doesn't mean they're great at their job of presidency of the United States, but it's how you get elected president. You go out there and you speak loudly and you beat your fist on and you say a bunch of things that you can't do because the voting electorate you're working with requires it. And that's just the reality of being president. That's why so many presidents go into office when they're really loved, and inevitably by the time they end office, they're going to be less liked than when they went into office because they can't possibly do everything they promised. If presidents were honest with you, you'd hear a lot more answers like, I don't know, I don't have that power to do that. Well, what would you do if they? Well, I'm not the lawmaker. Yeah, I would have to work with Congress. I would have to work with Congress. I would have to work with Congress. But we as American people, we don't like that answer. We want the fist kind of beating down saying, no, as president of the United States, on day one, I will blah, blah, blah. Just between me and the fence post presidents, I go out there and say on day one, don't vote for that guy. Moving right along, or that woman for that matter. Then the Republican debate is a great way to watch, and you'll see a lot of this. And like I said, it's just the dichotomy of the current modern day presidency. Very similar in 1992. George H.W. Bush right here, his political chops by 1992 are impeccable. He just has so much experience, such a pedigree and credentialing in 1992. But Bill Clinton knew how to work a crowd. It's really fascinating watching these campaigns. When you look at the person most qualified for the presidency is often the one that doesn't win it. Like I said, Barack Obama was very good at this. In 2008, John McCain had far more political chops, political history, political qualifications than Barack Obama did. Barack Obama really didn't have much in the way of qualifications for president of the United States. He really didn't, and yet he won the election. So as we continue to look at the presidency and what it's become, we do see this kind of playing out where the qualifications were set for one reason, but they really did not expect the qualifications to be the guarantor. they expected the Electoral College to kind of win the day, and it was the Electoral College as kind of like secret shoppers of presidential selection that was going to win the day and protect us from this kind of politicized presidency. I'm not going to go over this. The book covers this really well. I sent out Words We Live By Linda R. Monk on paying attention to the secession of the presidency. The big thing here is there was some discrepancy on whether or not the vice president becomes or simply acts. Overwhelmingly, we simply allow it to happen after William Henry Harrison after William Henry Harrison dies in 1841 of natural causes. John Tyler becomes president and just does it. He kind of starts going to the office, sits in the office, starts responding his mail as President John Tyler, and we just kind of let it happen. We really didn't question it. So John Tyler sets a precedent that the vice president becomes the president, and then we pick a new vice president. And then this happens everything. Now, some of y'all may be looking at the slide saying like, wow, Crosby, that's a whole lot of deaths in the presidency. And the answer is, yeah, it is. Most people only know really about a few of these. So a lot of people know about the John F. Kennedy issue, and a lot of people know about the Abraham Lincoln one. And so those two key assassinations. But if you look at this, I mean, Abraham Lincoln assassinated James A. Garfield. Guys, Garfield is a president. He's fascinating. I mean, absolutely fascinating. And nobody really knows a lot about him. He is your quintessential rags to riches. Herbert Hoover is another one that's worth checking out. That they're just brilliant human beings that work them way from squalor. And the thing about Garfield and the thing about Herbert Hoover, and I would say even the thing about H.W. Bush, is there's a lot of them that challenge the politics. They challenge the partisan narratives, and yet they are going to find themselves in a predicament because all of them have a rough time as presidency or as president. And so nonetheless, William McKinley assassinated as well. And so late 1800s is not a good time to be president of the United States. We're going to see an increase in presidential security at the beginning of the 1900s with Theodore Roosevelt. And we're going to kind of keep on going this. Now, the interesting thing about all this is simple. John F. Kennedy is going to be assassinated in 1963. Remember, I told you a while ago, in a shrewd political move, John F. Kennedy aligned himself with Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, the historical element there is they didn't get along very well. Lyndon Baines Johnson represented more Southern Democrat Party. JFK represented the more Northern Democrat Party. We looked at that kind of combination between the North and the South. And so what happened here is a lot of people question whether or not this was on the up and up. Whether or not the elements that we were going to see between LBJ and JFK were legitimate. A lot of Democrats voted for, LBJ, thinking that he was going to bring back this kind of old school Democrat South. Whereas a lot of the new school Democrats voted for JFK, thinking it was going to be this new kind of continuation of FDR policies. And so the split in the Democrat Party really kind of led this. However, following the assassination, even though we question, was Lyndon Baines Johnson involved in the assassination? Is this good policy? We do double down as a nation, and we pass the 25th Amendment, and the 25th Amendment does guarantee that if the president is removed or resigned, that the vice president shall become president. So we remove some of the confusion, some of the minor things that are going to happen. And that happens. Anytime you pass law, somebody's going to have to administer that law. Somebody's going to have to work that out and whatnot. So there is an element of there. Just know that the 25th Amendment does kind of take Tyler's precedent and makes it official constitutional elements. And so moving right along here, this is presidential package, kind of whatnot we have. There is the pomp, the fanfare, everything you'd want in the presidency comes down to it. And then you have the oath or affirmation. The last part of Article 2, Section 1 is the affirmation that all presidents have said. Now, in this one, if you're reading this, it says, before you enter the execution of office, you shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Notice that in the Constitution, there is no mentioning of the so help me God. It is not there. It's still not there. That phrase, so help me God, has been uttered by every single president since the beginning, and it's still said today primarily for one reason. Once again, Washington did it. And because Washington did it, even though Washington was one of the highest, most respected men in our nation, Washington still humbled himself to the position. He says, I am not above the position, and I can only do this job well with some type of divine intervention, some kind of divine support. Once again, this harkens back to a Lockean ideology of a divine, of an internal moral consciousness, that we are beholden to an idea or a narrative beyond our own affirmation or want of right. And so Washington kind of adds those lines, so help me God, which philosophically speaking does radically alter this oath and really kind of suggests that the presidency of the United States does not have just an obligation to a political, tangible, earthly kind of politic, but they also have an obligation to uphold their duty as president to a supreme being or a supreme maker. Next week, we're going to get into the commander-in-chief. I'm going to effectively go over what has happened to the role of the presidency. We have seen a overwhelmingly large increase in the role of the presidency as the United States has increased in its power and might. I'm also going to try to answer the question of why we're in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's a lot of fun. Next week will be a longer lecture. So this week I'm kind of leaning on read Article 2 that I sent out and kind of wrap up some of the prelims of the presidency. So next week we'll have 2 longer lectures where we'll get into American foreign policy and what America is really trying to do in the world, which is quite fascinating and quite frustrating because it really is one of those things that is often misunderstood, but really requires our attention if we're going to get the American presidency right, especially coming into an election year. So until then, I bid you all adieu. Hopefully you're all getting something from this. Please email me, contact me, reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And again, I do appreciate all of your patience with the modified approach. Like I'm literally underneath a blanket in a very small room right now trying to record, right, so that y'all get a decent lecture. So I appreciate it. Let me know how it's all working out, and I will see y'all next week.